My name is Evelyn Hart, and at 69 years old, I never imagined I would hear my own daughter-in-law call me useless in the house I shared with my husband for nearly 4 decades. But that is exactly what happened on the afternoon of my granddaughter's 12th birthday, right there in my kitchen, with the smell of sugar and vanilla still drifting through the air. I had been awake since just after dawn, listening to the quiet crackle of the old radio while I frosted Mia's cake. She loves purple, so I piped little lavender roses along the edges, the same shade as the fuchsia blooms in my backyard. My back protested every time I bent over, but when she hurried through the doorway in her new dress and whispered, "It's beautiful, Grandma," the ache felt like something I had earned. I had just set the cake on the counter when my phone buzzed. The name Carter & Co. Antiques glowed on the screen. My breath caught. Mr. Carter had been trying to reach me for days about my mother's opal necklace, the one tucked away in a shoebox I kept hidden behind winter coats. I wiped my hands on my apron and answered. "Mrs. Hart," he said, almost triumphant. "I found a buyer. They're offering just under $90,000. If you're still willing, we can move forward today." 90,000. At my age, that kind of money didn't sound like luxury. It sounded like safety. I pictured fixing the skylight over my old art studio, maybe even carving out a piece of the house that belonged wholly to me again. But before I could respond, another voice rose sharply above the chatter in the living room. "Evelyn!" It was Lena. "Hang up that phone. Cancel whatever little plan you think you have and get out here. These kids are wrecking the place. You need to clean up. It's the least you can do since we let you live here for free." The room beyond the doorway went silent. 30 people. Bright balloons. The rustling of wrapping paper. All of it froze. I stood there with the phone pressed to my cheek like a teenager caught doing something wrong. Daniel was beside her, my only son, staring down at the floorboards as though they might swallow him. He didn't say a word. And in that moment, surrounded by voices that weren't mine, in the home Jack and I built with our own hands, I felt a kind of quiet humiliation settle over me. Not loud, not dramatic, just cold, familiar. I heard Mr. Carter asking if I was still there, but his voice felt far away. "I'm going to have to call you back," I whispered, setting the phone down. My fingers shook, but my voice didn't when I stepped into the doorway. "No," I said. It wasn't a shout, just a simple word, one I hadn't used in years. But the way Lena blinked at me, you would have thought I had slapped her. "What did you say?" she demanded. "I said no," I repeated, feeling something tighten and then break loose inside me. "I'm not canceling anything, and I'm not cleaning your party." A ripple moved through the crowd. Mia stood near the couch, her little shoulders tense, eyes darting between me and her mother. Daniel lifted his head as if waking from a long sleep. Lena laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "You're being ridiculous. Without us, you'd already be in some cheap nursing home. Now stop making a scene." She turned away before I could answer, and maybe that was the moment that did it, the turn of her shoulder, the easy assumption that I would follow. But I didn't. I walked back into the kitchen, opened the narrow pantry door, and pulled out the small suitcase I had packed months ago. It had sat there hidden behind bags of flour and canned fruit, waiting for a moment I never thought would come. "Mom, what are you doing?" Daniel asked, finally sounding alive. "What I should have done a long time ago," I said. I lifted the suitcase, walked past the stunned faces, opened the back door, and stepped into the cool Oregon air. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. Every step across my own porch felt like shedding a layer of silence I had worn for too long. Joan's kitchen window glowed warm next door. I could already see her silhouette behind the curtains. When she opened her door and saw the suitcase in my hand, she didn't ask a single question. Not until hours later, when I finally finished telling her every ugly detail, did she speak. "Evelyn," she said softly, "before anything else, do you even know whose name is on the deed to that house?" I didn't sleep much that night on Joan's sofa. Every time I closed my eyes, her question echoed back at me. "Do you even know whose name is on the deed?" It was embarrassing to admit, even to myself, but I didn't. When Jack was alive, he handled the important paperwork, taxes, insurance, mortgage statements, while I handled birthdays, Christmas lists, and every scraped knee Mia ever had. After he died, the grief sat on me like fog. I moved through that first year on autopilot, pretending to function while half of me still waited for the sound of his boots in the mudroom. The lockbox with our documents became something I passed in the hallway without ever touching, as if opening it meant accepting that my life had split in two. The next morning, sunlight slanted through Joan's blinds, landing on the coffee mug she set in front of me. It smelled like cinnamon. She didn't hover or pry. She just sat at her table sewing a crooked seam on a quilt block while I stared into my drink. When the house grew quiet, I finally stood and asked if she had a step stool. The lockbox was exactly where I remembered it. Top shelf of the hall closet back home, behind a stack of dusty board games no one had touched since Daniel was a boy. I felt strangely nervous climbing up for it, like I was disturbing a grave. The metal was cold and heavier than I expected. I carried it back to Joan's kitchen and set it on her table, listening to the small tremor in my breath. The key was still on the ring of odds and ends I kept in my purse, old grocery tags, a church locker key, the charm Mia gave me when she was 6. When the lock clicked open, something in my chest did too. Inside were the pieces of a life I had half forgotten. Our marriage certificate tucked under a photo of Jack, grinning with paint on his jeans, the handwritten list of repairs he planned to do next spring, the crisp envelope from the day we bought the house on Maple Street. I pulled the deed out slowly, smoothing it on the table with hands that suddenly felt older than they were. My name stared back at me. Owner. Evelyn May Hart. No co-signer. No shared ownership. Jack had put it entirely in my name, probably because he trusted me more than he ever trusted himself with long-term planning. A soft laugh escaped me. Sad, surprised, a little angry at myself. I had spent 12 years acting like a guest in a home that legally belonged to me alone. 12 years being shuffled into smaller and smaller corners because I believed keeping the peace was the same as being a good mother. I took a picture of the deed with my phone, then folded it carefully, sliding it back into the envelope. My fingers still trembled when I closed the lockbox. When Joan returned from the grocery store, she found me at her table, staring at the deed like it was a verdict. "So?" she asked quietly. "It's mine," I said. "All of it." Jack put it in my name. She nodded, as if she'd known the answer all along. "Then it's time you stop living like a guest." That afternoon, she called her grandson, Alex. I'd met him once at a holiday potluck. Nice young man, polite, the kind who listens more than he talks. When he walked into her kitchen wearing a navy jacket and carrying a worn leather briefcase, he shook my hand with surprising gentleness. "What's going on? Mrs. Hart?" he asked. Something about his voice, steady, patient, made it easy to tell him the truth. I told him about the move-in that was supposed to be temporary, about losing the master bedroom just until Mia slept better, about the storage room that became permanent without anyone saying it out loud. I told him about the birthday tea that turned into Lena's networking party, the little comments about my memory, the way she talked about our house to people who barely knew me. Alex didn't interrupt. His face didn't twist with pity or disbelief. He just listened, tapping his pen lightly against a legal pad as if he were sketching the outline of a puzzle he intended to solve. When I finished, he exhaled slowly and glanced at Joan. "This isn't just inconsiderate," he said. "It's a pattern, and if it continues, it could become dangerous." "Dangerous how?" I asked. "Financially, legally, emotionally," he said. "If your daughter-in-law is telling others you're confused or unsafe, and she's benefiting from living in your home without contributing, that's territory we take seriously." I stared at him, stunned by the word he didn't say out loud but left hanging in the room anyway. Abuse. "I'm not helpless," I whispered. "I know." He answered. "That's why we're going to make sure no one treats you like you are." For the first time in years, I felt something warm flicker beneath the heaviness. Hope and fear. And the sense that everything in my life was about to shift, whether I was ready or not. The strange thing about losing control of your home is that it rarely happens in a single moment. It happens the way winter arrives, quietly, inch by inch, until one morning you look outside and realize the world has changed while you weren't paying attention. For me, that realization came on my 68th birthday. It was supposed to be a small celebration. I hadn't asked for much, not at my age, just a gentle afternoon with the quilting ladies, some lemon bars, a pot of Earl Grey, and the living room Jack and I used to sit in on Sunday nights. I wanted the comfort of hearing those familiar voices drifting across the furniture we'd picked out together, the feeling of being something other than an afterthought in my own home. When I brought it up over meatloaf at dinner, Lena smiled like a hostess in a magazine ad. "Of course," she said. "That sounds lovely. I'll put it in the calendar." For the next week, I prepared the way I used to prepare for church luncheons, carefully, happily, telling myself that maybe things were turning a corner. I ironed the good napkins. I polished the teapot Jack gave me on our 20th anniversary. I baked lemon bars the way Mia liked them, extra tart. On Saturday morning, I slipped into my soft gray cardigan and carried a tray of cups into the living room. I stopped cold. Balloons floated near the ceiling, metallic and loud against the paint I'd chosen decades earlier. A folding table stood in the center of the room, draped in a white cloth and covered in catered appetizers I hadn't ordered. Two men I didn't know were hauling in tubs of ice and champagne. The music was already playing. Lena stood directing them, her voice crisp. When she noticed me, she gave a quick, almost guilty smile. "Oh, Evelyn, I meant to mention this. I scheduled a networking mixer today. Big referrals on the line." She gestured vaguely toward the kitchen. "You can still have your quilting thing in there if you want." I stared at her, then at the trays of food, then back at her. "But you said—" "I know," she cut in quickly, already turning her attention back to the caterer. "But this is important for business. More business means more stability for everyone." Everyone. A word that somehow excluded me. I carried the cups back into the kitchen, placed them gently on the counter, and stared at them 2 full minutes before picking up the phone. I told each of my friends I wasn't feeling well. They wished me a happy birthday and told me to rest. None of them knew I was hiding behind a pantry door to keep my voice steady. From the window above the sink, I watched Lena greet her guests. She gestured around the house like a proud owner, her hand sweeping toward the crown molding, the brick fireplace, the kitchen I had scrubbed until my knees hurt. I heard her laugh and say, "It's tight, but it's ours." I felt something wilt inside me. Later, after the last champagne flute had clinked and the guests had left, I found myself on my knees picking confetti out of the rug. Lena walked through the hallway barefoot, scrolling through her phone, humming. "You're a lifesaver," she said absently as she stepped over the trash bag I was holding. "I'll Venmo you for all this next week." She never did. That night, in the cramped room by the washer, the pipes clattered louder than usual. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, telling myself it was just one bad day. But beneath that lie was another truth I had tried hard not to see. I wasn't part of the home anymore. I was the help. A few weeks later, the mask slipped again, this time without confetti or champagne to cover it. I was carrying laundry down the hall when I heard Lena talking on the phone in her bedroom. Her voice was raw, stripped of the sugary sweetness she used with clients. "You don't get it," she said sharply. "We moved every year when I was a kid. We never knew if we'd be able to pay rent. I promised myself I'd never live like that again. I need this house. I'm not raising Mia with the same fear I grew up with." I froze, hugging the basket to my chest. There was a part of me, soft, foolish, that almost felt sorry for her. Poverty has a way of leaving a scar, even years later. I knew what fear could do to a person. I knew how it could warp them. But then she hung up the call, brushed past me without acknowledgement, and headed straight into the kitchen, as if I were part of the wallpaper. She didn't ask how I was doing. She didn't mention my birthday. She just opened a sparkling water and walked away. I realized, standing there beneath the hallway light, that her fear had not softened her. It had sharpened her. And I was the easiest place for her to aim it. That Thursday during quilting night, I finally cracked. With my needle sliding unevenly through the fabric, I heard myself say, "It's nice to sit in a living room I'm actually allowed to use." The whole table went still. Joan lowered her glasses and looked at me in that steady, no-nonsense way she had. "Evelyn," she asked gently, "whose name is on that house?" I opened my mouth, but no answer came out. Because I didn't know. Because I had never asked myself. Because I had been too busy surviving. And as I walked home that night beneath the Oregon streetlights, her question followed me like a shadow I could no longer ignore. I didn't walk back into my house expecting forgiveness or understanding. I certainly didn't expect peace. But I wanted clarity. And as I stood inside my living room again, with chairs arranged in a stiff half circle and faces turned toward me, that clarity arrived all at once. It settled inside my ribs like something inevitable. Lena began the meeting the way she begins her sales pitches. Steady voice, careful pacing, just enough sympathy to sound noble. She talked about my confusion, about her concerns, about how the house was too big for someone my age. She described a facility with gardens and activities, a place where I would still have independence but with support. Her mother nodded at each phrase as if she had helped write them. Carol kept her eyes down, as though she didn't quite want to be there. Daniel stood behind Lena's chair, arms folded. He looked conflicted, but he didn't interrupt. Mia, sweet Mia, sat on the stairs with her knees tucked under her chin. Her eyes flicked between each adult like she was trying to memorize the rules of a game she didn't want to play. When Lena finished, she closed her folder as though sealing the deal. "We want what's best for you, Evelyn," she said. "We're trying to help you make the right decision." I let the silence stretch long enough to feel every heartbeat in the room. Then I reached into my purse and pulled out the blue notebook. "I've been keeping a record," I said. "Since last month, when you told the neighbor I left the stove on." Lena's smile folded in on itself. I opened to the page where I had written the porch conversation word for word. My voice didn't tremble as I read it aloud. The date, the time, the claim about memory care, the lie about the stove. I watched Carol's shoulders rise as she inhaled sharply. I watched Daniel shift his weight as if the floor had moved. I turned to the next page and read the line Lena had spoken over the phone. "Once we get guardianship sorted, we can finally make some decisions about this property." I didn't add anything, didn't change the tone, didn't accuse. I simply read what she had said. "That's not what I meant," Lena snapped. "You're twisting things." "I'm repeating them," I answered. Before she could respond, there was a knock on the door, soft, polite, but perfectly timed. Daniel went to open it. Alex stepped inside first, followed by Officer Ramirez, whose calm presence filled the room like a warning bell. Lena's face drained to paper white. Alex greeted the room with a professional nod, then placed a folder on the coffee table. "I'm here representing Mrs. Hart," he said. "This is documentation confirming her mental competency, as well as evidence of attempts to obtain unauthorized legal authority over her property. Officer Ramirez is here to ensure that this meeting remains civil and that no coercion occurs." Lena sputtered something about misunderstanding, but Alex continued, his tone unshakable. "Mrs. Hart has chosen to remain in her home. As the sole legal owner, she is within her rights to ask anyone to vacate if they create an unsafe or exploitative environment, effective immediately. There will be no further attempts to move her without her consent." Daniel's eyes widened. He looked from Alex to me as if realizing that the ground he'd been standing on was not as solid as he believed. I rose from the chair and turned to him. "I love you," I said quietly. "But I will not tolerate being erased in my own home. I will not be sent away for convenience. And I won't allow anyone, family or not, to use my age as a weapon." The room held its breath. "I'm asking you and Lena to leave within 30 days. I continued. "You can take your time finding another place. I won't rush you, but I'm reclaiming my home." Lena stood abruptly, tears streaking her mascara. "You can't do this," she said, voice cracking. "We need this house. We don't have anywhere else." "Then you should have treated me like someone whose home you were borrowing," I answered. "Not someone you could quietly remove." She stared at me, angry, stunned, frightened. But she didn't argue again. When they finally left the room, Mia stayed on the stairs. Hesitant, she walked toward me slowly, like a child approaching an injured animal. "Grandma," she whispered, "are you really staying?" I opened my arms, and she stepped into them. Her small frame shook against me. "Yes," I said. "This is my home, and I'm done being silent inside it." It wasn't triumph I felt in that moment. It wasn't vengeance. It was something steadier, something I hadn't felt in years, the weight of my own life returning to my hands, and standing there, holding my granddaughter in the house Jack built. I understood, finally fully, that saying no had been the first step. Saying I'm staying was the last. When the house finally grew quiet, I walked through each room slowly, almost afraid to disturb the stillness. The evening light pooled in soft gold across the hardwood floors, catching dust motes that drifted like tiny reminders of the life I'd tried so hard to protect. I paused at the doorway of the dining room, letting my fingertips brush the edge of the table Jack had sanded smooth one summer. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like an intruder passing through someone else's territory. The air felt warmer, as if the house was easing back into its old shape around me. I stepped into the living room and lowered myself into Jack's armchair. It creaked the way it always had, familiar and grounding. From that seat, I could see the staircase where Mia had stood watching the entire confrontation unfold. I could also see the faint outline of her handprint on the wall, left there when she was 4, and insisted on helping me dust. Sitting there, surrounded by the echoes of who we had been, I felt a quiet certainty settle into place. I wasn't just staying. I was finally coming home.